My daughter screamed and refused to get in the car. Exhausted, we stayed home. 1 hour later, my husband called, voice breaking. "Everyone at the restaurant is gone." I whispered, "How?" He said, "The kitchen." David's voice cracked into fragments over the phone, words barely forming through what sounded like hyperventilation or sobbing. "Nathan, everyone who ate dinner is collapsing. The paramedics are saying they're already dead. 18 people. The whole dining room. I'm watching them put sheets over bodies right now, and oh God, we were supposed to be sitting at table 6. Our reservation was for 7:30. We should have been eating the special by 8:15. My hand went numb around the phone. I looked across our living room to where Lily, our 5-year-old daughter, was building a tower with wooden blocks, completely absorbed in her game, humming a song from school. 1 hour ago, she'd been screaming in our driveway, having a complete meltdown about getting in the car, thrashing and crying with an intensity I'd never seen from her before. We'd had reservations at the Riverside Grill, an upscale French restaurant downtown, where David had been planning to celebrate his promotion to senior partner at his law firm. We'd made the reservation 3 weeks ago, confirmed it that morning, arranged for Lily to stay with my sister, until we'd remembered at the last minute that my sister had the flu and couldn't take her. So we'd brought Lily along, dressed her in her favorite purple dress, told her we were going somewhere special. I'd spent 15 years as a food safety toxicologist for the Oregon Department of Health, investigating contamination incidents, analyzing pathogen outbreaks, testifying in court cases about foodborne illness. I knew restaurants. I knew food handling protocols and health code violations and the 1,000 ways preparation could go wrong. But what David was describing wasn't food poisoning, wasn't salmonella or listeria or any pathogen with the incubation period measured in hours or days. People didn't collapse and die within minutes of eating contaminated food unless something profoundly toxic had been introduced. "David, listen to me carefully. Did you eat anything? Anything at all?" "No. I ordered a glass of wine, but it hasn't arrived yet. I was waiting for you. The waitress said she'd bring it with our appetizers once you got here. Where are you right now?" "Still at my table. The police won't let anyone leave. They're treating this as a crime scene. Nathan, the kitchen door is open and I can see inside. There are people in hazmat suits. What the hell is happening?" I told him to stay on the line, put the phone on speaker, and pulled up local news on my laptop. Breaking alerts were already flooding the screen. Mass casualty event at downtown restaurant. 18 confirmed dead at the Riverside Grill. Hazmat teams responding to suspected chemical contamination. The early reports were confused and contradictory, but certain details kept repeating. All victims had ordered the evening special, a pan-seared duck breast with cherry reduction. All had collapsed within 10 to 15 minutes of their meals being served. Emergency responders who'd arrived at 8:43 p.m. had found a dining room full of bodies, patrons slumped at their tables, some on the floor where they'd fallen, most showing signs of convulsions and respiratory distress. David was still on the phone, his breathing ragged, describing what he was seeing. The restaurant owner, Raymond Duchamp, being led out in handcuffs, screaming that it wasn't his fault, that something must have been wrong with the supplier. The medical examiner arriving with a team of assistants, the detective coordinating witness statements. I asked David to describe everything he could see in the kitchen from where he sat, any details about preparation or storage or the people working there. He said the kitchen had gone completely still, all the staff gathered in one corner being questioned by police, the head chef sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. I'd met Raymond Duchamp twice before, both times at City Health Department meetings where he'd represented the Restaurant Owners Association. He was in his late 50s, classically trained in Paris, had run the Riverside Grill for 23 years, built a reputation for exacting standards and Michelin-quality cuisine. He'd never had a serious health code violation, never even a customer complaint serious enough to trigger an investigation. Looking at Lily playing with her blocks, I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach as I processed how close we'd come to being in that dining room. If she hadn't had her meltdown, if we'd managed to get her in the car, we'd have arrived at 7:30 p.m. exactly. We'd have ordered the special because David always ordered the special, said it showed respect for the chef's vision. We'd have been eating by 8 p.m., and by 8:45 p.m., we'd have been corpses under sheets while paramedics documented the scene. The news was now showing aerial footage from a helicopter, emergency vehicles surrounding the restaurant, crowds of people being held back by police barricades, reporters with cameras already setting up live shots. The chyron at the bottom of the screen kept updating the death toll. 18 confirmed, 23 transported to hospital, 4 in critical condition. I called my supervisor at the health department, Dr. Margaret Holloway, 26 years in public health toxicology, currently director of Oregon's Food Safety Division. She'd already been contacted by Portland PD and was coordinating with the CDC and FBI. She asked if I was available to consult on the investigation. I told her my family had been supposed to be at that restaurant tonight, that my husband was currently being held there as a witness, that I needed to recuse myself from anything official, but that I was available unofficially if they needed my expertise. She paused for a long moment, then said quietly, "Nathan, I'm sorry. I know how close that is. But if you're willing to help, even informally, we need people who understand rapid onset toxic exposure. The preliminary analysis is suggesting something far beyond normal food contamination. This looks intentional." The word hung in the air between us. Intentional. Someone had deliberately poisoned 18 people to death at an upscale French restaurant on a Saturday evening. The question was who and why. David finally came home at 2:37 a.m., escorted by a police officer who needed his formal statement about what he'd witnessed. He looked hollowed out, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red from crying or shock or both. He went straight to Lily's room, stood in her doorway watching her sleep for a long time before coming to find me in the kitchen. "They're saying it was cyanide," he said quietly. "Potassium cyanide mixed into the cherry reduction sauce. Fast-acting, deadly at small doses, almost impossible to detect by taste because the cherries masked the bitter almond smell. The medical examiner told me victims would have experienced dizziness, difficulty breathing, convulsions, then cardiac arrest within minutes. Most of them were probably unconscious before they realized something was wrong. I'd worked with cyanide poisoning cases before, industrial accidents mostly, workers exposed to electroplating solutions or metal processing facilities. I'd never seen it used deliberately in food, and certainly not at this scale. They're testing the kitchen," David continued. "The refrigerator where the cherry reduction was stored, the containers, the utensils, everything. The head chef swears he made the sauce himself 2 days ago, tasted it, stored it properly. He's saying there's no way it was contaminated when he prepared it, that someone must have added something after the fact." "Who had access to the kitchen?" That's what the detective kept asking. Apparently the kitchen staff, the wait staff, the owner, the dishwasher, the prep cooks, maybe a dozen people total, plus delivery personnel, health inspectors, anyone who might have been in the building that day. "What about security cameras?" "Raymond had them, but the one covering the walk-in refrigerator where the sauce was stored malfunctioned 3 days ago. He'd called a repair company, but they hadn't come out yet, so there's no footage of who accessed that refrigerator between Thursday when the sauce was made and tonight when it was served. The timing was too convenient. The one camera that would have shown contamination failing right before a mass poisoning. I made a mental note to find out more about that malfunction, about who knew the camera was down, about whether it had actually failed or been deliberately disabled. Over the next 48 hours, the investigation expanded into something unprecedented in Oregon's history. The FBI took jurisdiction, designating the incident as a potential terrorism case. Detective Frank Kowalski, 22 years with Portland PD's Major Crimes Unit, led the local coordination, working alongside federal agents and health department specialists. The medical examiner, Dr. Rebecca Lindstrom, 18 years in forensic pathology, confirmed that all victims had died from cyanide poisoning, with blood concentrations indicating a massive dose far beyond what could occur naturally or accidentally. The cherry reduction sauce tested at 3,200 parts per million of potassium cyanide, roughly 160 times the lethal dose for an average adult. Someone hadn't just contaminated the sauce. They'd turned it into a weapon. The media coverage was relentless. National news picked up the story, running segments about restaurant safety and domestic terrorism and the vulnerability of the food supply. Victims' families began speaking out, demanding answers, demanding justice. The mayor held a press conference promising a full investigation. The governor activated state emergency resources. And through it all, Raymond Duchamp maintained his innocence, insisting through his lawyer that he'd never harm his customers, that his restaurant was his life's work, that someone must have sabotaged his kitchen to destroy him. I watched the press conferences from my living room while Lily played, trying to process how our lives had intersected with mass murder through nothing but random chance and a 5-year-old's inexplicable tantrum. David had taken the week off from work, unable to concentrate on legal briefs and client calls after watching 18 people die in front of him. We'd set up counseling for both of us, sessions with Dr. Angela Norton, 15 years specializing in trauma recovery, who said survivors' guilt was common in mass casualty events, that the randomness of who lived and who died could create profound psychological distress. But I couldn't stop thinking about the logistics of the poisoning, about who had the knowledge and access and motive to kill 18 strangers at a French restaurant. On the 4th day after the incident, I got a call from Dr. Holloway asking if I'd be willing to review some findings the investigation team had developed. I drove to the health department headquarters and met with her and Detective Kowalski in a secure conference room. They'd spread crime scene photos and lab reports across the table, a timeline of events mapped on a whiteboard, victim information organized in columns. Kowalski got straight to the point. "We've got a problem. The cyanide contamination should be straightforward. Someone added poison to the sauce, we find who had access and motive, we make an arrest. But the evidence isn't pointing anywhere clear. Everyone who worked at that restaurant had opportunity. Most of them had access to the kitchen and the walk-in refrigerator. But nobody had an obvious motive, and we can't find any connection between the victims that would explain targeting them specifically." He pulled out a list of the 18 deceased. They ranged in age from 24 to 71, came from different neighborhoods and professional backgrounds, had no apparent connection to each other beyond having made reservations at the Riverside Grill that night. Some were celebrating anniversaries, others were on first dates. One was a food critic from the Oregonian. 2 were tourists from California. The randomness suggested this wasn't about the victims at all, but about the restaurant itself, or the person who poisoned them. "What about Raymond Duchamp?" I asked. "Any financial problems? Insurance issues? Disputes with employees or suppliers?" Dr. Holloway pulled out a financial analysis. His restaurant was profitable, not wildly so, but stable. He owned the building outright, had paid off his commercial mortgage 8 years ago. His insurance policy covers general liability and business interruption, but nothing that would pay out in a poisoning scenario. In fact, his insurance company is already denying his claims, citing criminal activity exclusions. So he had no financial motive to destroy his own business, I said. Kowalski nodded. And he was visibly devastated at the scene, genuinely shocked. Either he's an incredible actor, or he didn't know the sauce was contaminated. We've polygraphed him twice, and he's passed both times. What about the head chef who made the sauce? Philippe Moreau, 41 years old, worked with Duchamp for 15 years. Same story, genuinely devastated, no apparent motive, passed the polygraph. Says he tasted the sauce when he made it on Thursday and it was fine. Says he can't understand how it became contaminated. I studied the timeline on the whiteboard. Sauce prepared Thursday at 2 p.m., stored in walk-in refrigerator in a sealed container. Served Saturday evening starting at 7:45 p.m. Window of contamination sometime between Thursday afternoon and Saturday evening. The refrigerator camera malfunction discovered Friday morning. Doctor. Holloway pointed to another document. We've been analyzing the cyanide compound itself. It's industrial-grade potassium cyanide, the kind used in metal processing and electroplating. We're trying to trace where it might have been sourced from, but it's not a controlled substance in small quantities. Anyone with basic chemistry knowledge could purchase it online or steal it from an industrial facility. What about delivery records? I asked. Anyone who received packages at the restaurant in the days before the poisoning? Kowalski pulled out another file. 17 deliveries between Monday and Saturday. Food suppliers, linen service, wine distributor, equipment repair. We're tracking down every delivery person, but so far nothing suspicious. Most of them never went near the kitchen, just dropped boxes at the service entrance. I looked at the crime scene photos, studying the kitchen layout, the positioning of refrigerators and prep stations and storage areas. Something about the setup felt wrong, but I couldn't immediately articulate what bothered me. Then I saw it. The walk-in refrigerator, I said, pointing to a photo. It's a commercial unit with a key code lock, right? Who knew the code? Dr. Holloway checked her notes. Duchamp, Philippe the head chef, the sous chef, and the restaurant manager. 4 people total. The code hadn't been changed in 3 years. And the camera that malfunctioned was specifically the one covering that refrigerator? Correct. Duchamp says he noticed it was out on Friday morning when he reviewed overnight footage as part of his normal security routine. He called the installation company, but they couldn't schedule a repair until the following week. I pulled out my phone and looked up the camera installation company. It was a small local firm called SecureView Systems, in business for 8 years, generally good reviews. I asked Kowalski if they'd interviewed anyone from SecureView. He said not yet, that the camera malfunction hadn't seemed significant compared to the contamination itself. I think it's very significant, I said. The odds of that specific camera failing right before a contamination event in the exact location it covered? That's not coincidence. Someone either sabotaged the camera or knew it was down and took advantage of the window of opportunity. Kowalski made a note to follow up with SecureView Systems. Dr. Holloway asked if I'd be willing to visit the restaurant with her, to walk through the kitchen and look for anything the initial investigation might have missed. I'd need to get clearance from the FBI since it was still an active crime scene, but she thought my food safety expertise might spot details others wouldn't notice. 2 days later, I stood in the kitchen of the Riverside Grill, wearing protective gear and booties, looking at the space where 18 people's last meals had been prepared. The kitchen was immaculate even after the forensic teams had processed it, everything in its designated place, prep stations organized with professional precision. Philippe Moreau had run a tight operation here, maintained standards that would have passed any health inspection. The walk-in refrigerator was a commercial unit manufactured by Cold Tech Industries, about 8 feet by 10 feet, lined with metal shelving holding containers of prepped ingredients and prepared sauces. The cherry reduction had been stored on the 3rd shelf in a plastic container with a snap-on lid, clearly labeled with preparation date and Felipe's initials. I examined the container, now empty and sealed in an evidence bag. There were no signs of tampering on the lid, no scratches or damage suggesting forced entry. Whoever had contaminated the sauce had opened it normally, added the cyanide, and closed it again, leaving no obvious trace. Doctor. Holloway pointed to the disabled security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. The installation company sent us their service records. That camera was part of a system installed 6 years ago, regularly maintained, no history of malfunctions. Then suddenly on Thursday night or early Friday morning, it stopped recording. Their technician came out yesterday to inspect it and found the power cable had been disconnected inside the ceiling panel. Disconnected? Not failed? I asked. Deliberately disconnected. Someone accessed the ceiling, pulled the cable, and disabled the camera. The technician said it would have taken maybe 2 minutes if you knew where to look and had a ladder. So this was planned, I said. Someone scouted the kitchen, identified the camera covering the refrigerator, disabled it, then contaminated the sauce knowing there'd be no video evidence. That's the working theory. But here's the problem. The ceiling access would have required a ladder, and we can't find any evidence of someone bringing a ladder into the restaurant during the relevant time period. The staff ladders are accounted for and show no signs of recent use. So either someone brought their own ladder and removed it, or they had a legitimate reason to be working in that area. I looked up at the ceiling, studying the panel layout and the camera positioning. The disabled camera was mounted near the walk-in refrigerator, but the ceiling panels in that area were about 9 feet high, too tall to reach without a ladder or step stool, unless someone was particularly tall or athletic enough to pull themselves up somehow. "What about the equipment repair delivery you mentioned?" I asked. "Was anyone here working on ceiling-mounted systems that would have given them legitimate ladder access?" Kowalski checked his notes on his phone. "We had an HVAC company here on Thursday afternoon doing routine maintenance on the ventilation system. 2 technicians, both with the company for over 5 years, both with clean backgrounds. They would have had ladders and legitimate access to ceiling panels." "Did anyone verify what they actually worked on?" "Duchamp signed off on their service ticket. They cleaned the hood vents over the stoves and checked the refrigerator compressors. Standard quarterly maintenance." "But they would have had access to the ceiling panels and the camera wiring," I said. "They could have disabled the camera while they were up there working, made it look like equipment failure, and no one would have questioned it because they were supposed to be in the ceiling." Dr. Holloway pulled out her phone and called the FBI agent coordinating the investigation. Within an hour, we had the names and backgrounds of the 2 HVAC technicians who'd been at the Riverside Grill on Thursday. Both were being brought in for questioning. Both claimed they'd only worked on the ventilation system, never touched the security cameras, had no knowledge of any contamination. But when the FBI ran deeper background checks, something interesting emerged. One of the technicians, a man named Russell Vance, 38 years old, had a brother who died 3 years ago from complications of food poisoning traced to an upscale restaurant in Seattle. The brother, Thomas Vance, had eaten at a restaurant called Bella Vista, contracted severe salmonella poisoning, developed septic shock, and died after a week in intensive care. The restaurant had been shut down, the owner fined, but no criminal charges had been filed because the contamination was ruled accidental, a result of improper food handling rather than intentional negligence. Russell had been devastated by his brother's death, had posted extensively on social media about restaurant safety and corporate accountability, had written letters to health departments demanding stricter regulations. And then, 6 months ago, he'd started working for an HVAC company that serviced commercial kitchens across Portland and Seattle, including the Riverside Grill. The FBI brought Russell in for formal questioning at 6:15 p.m. on a Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the poisoning. I watched from an observation room as Detective Kowalski and FBI Special Agent Monica Reeves, 14 years in domestic terrorism investigations, walked him through his movements on Thursday. Russell was nervous but cooperative, insisting he'd only done routine maintenance, that he'd never touched the security cameras, that he had no idea how anyone's food could have been contaminated. Then Kowalski shifted the conversation to Russell's brother, to Thomas's death, and the Seattle restaurant, and Russell's posts about food safety. Russell's expression changed, hardened. "My brother died because some chef couldn't be bothered to cook chicken to proper temperature, died in agony from an infection that was completely preventable, and the owner of that restaurant paid a fine and moved on with his life like Thomas was just a number in a settlement." "That must have made you very angry," Agent Reeves said. "Of course it made me angry. It should make everyone angry. But I didn't. I would never—" He stopped, realized where the questioning was going. "You think I poisoned those people? Because of what happened to Thomas?" "Did you?" Kowalski asked quietly. "No. I fix air conditioning systems. I don't even know where you'd get cyanide or how to poison food. This is insane." "But you were in the restaurant Thursday afternoon," Reeves pressed. "You had access to the ceiling where the security camera was disabled. You had a ladder and the knowledge to reach the wiring, and you had a motive related to restaurant negligence and food safety." Russell's lawyer, who'd been sitting quietly, interrupted and recommended his client stop answering questions. The interview ended without a confession, but the FBI had enough for a search warrant. They executed it at Russell's apartment that night and found something that changed everything. In Russell's bedroom closet, they discovered a laptop containing extensive research about cyanide poisoning, including dosage calculations, detection methods, and solubility in various liquids. They found searches for how to disable security cameras, cherry reduction sauce recipes, and commercial kitchen layouts. They found a draft email addressed to local news stations, never sent, that read, "The restaurant industry has killed too many people through negligence and greed. Today's victims at the Riverside Grill died to prove that no one is safe when profit matters more than safety. Every restaurant is vulnerable. Every meal could be your last. Until the industry changes, the deaths will continue." The email was dated Friday, 1 day before the poisoning, suggesting Russell had written it in anticipation of an attack he was planning. But the FBI's analysis found something else. The metadata on the document showed it had been created on Russell's laptop, but it had been edited multiple times by someone else, someone whose IP address traced back to a location that wasn't Russell's apartment. When they tracked the IP address, it led to Raymond Duchamp's home. The investigation pivoted again. If Duchamp had been editing a document on Russell's laptop, that suggested either Russell and Duchamp were working together, or Duchamp had access to Russell's computer somehow. The FBI obtained warrants for Duchamp's electronic devices and discovered a troubling pattern. Duchamp had been messaging with someone using an encrypted app, discussing financial problems that weren't reflected in the restaurant's official records. The messages referenced offshore accounts, insurance adjusters, and making it look accidental. They referenced finding someone to blame and setting up the fall guy. And they referenced Russell Vance by name, noting that his brother's death made him a perfect suspect if anything happened at a restaurant. The person Duchamp had been messaging was identified through FBI technical analysis as Lawrence Kemper, Duchamp's insurance broker for the past 15 years. Kemper had been pushing Duchamp to increase his liability coverage 6 months ago, right around the time Duchamp's encrypted messaging began. When the FBI examined Kemper's finances, they found evidence of gambling debts totaling nearly $400,000, debts to organizations that didn't negotiate payment plans or accept excuses. Kemper needed money fast, and he'd apparently decided that insurance fraud through a staged food poisoning incident was his best option. The plan, as reconstructed by investigators, was elaborate and callous. Kemper had convinced Duchamp that they could stage a contamination incident, blame it on a disturbed employee or customer, collect insurance payouts for business interruption and wrongful death claims, and split the money. They'd researched potential suspects and identified Russell Vance as ideal because of his brother's death and his access to restaurants through his HVAC work. They'd arranged for Russell to service the Riverside Grill on Thursday, then accessed his laptop remotely, using malware installed through a phishing email sent weeks earlier. They'd planted the research about cyanide and the draft email, created a digital trail suggesting Russell was planning an attack. Then Duchamp had disabled the security camera himself during a late-night visit to the restaurant Thursday evening, accessed the walk-in refrigerator using his own key code, and contaminated the cherry reduction sauce with industrial cyanide that Kemper had acquired through his connections to manufacturing clients. Their plan had been to kill maybe 2 or 3 people, enough to trigger insurance claims but not so many that it would become a federal terrorism investigation. But they'd miscalculated the lethality of cyanide and the popularity of that evening's special. 18 people had ordered the duck with cherry reduction. 18 people had died. What was supposed to be a controlled fraud scheme had become mass murder, and the FBI investigation that followed had unraveled their entire conspiracy within a week. Raymond Duchamp and Lawrence Kemper were arrested simultaneously on Friday evening, charged with 18 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, tampering with evidence, and domestic terrorism. Russell Vance was released without charges, though the FBI kept his laptop as evidence of how he'd been framed. The arrests made national news, dominated coverage for days. The story of a respected restaurant owner and insurance broker murdering 18 innocent people for financial gain was horrifying enough. But the detail about framing a grieving brother for the crime added an extra layer of cruelty that captivated audiences. The trial began 8 months later. I attended several days of testimony, sitting in the gallery with David, watching as prosecutors presented the encrypted messages, the financial records, the forensic evidence linking Duchamp to the contaminated sauce. The defense tried to argue that Kemper had acted alone, that Duchamp had been manipulated and coerced, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 11 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both defendants. Duchamp showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Kemper wept. At sentencing, Judge Carol Brennan, 31 years on the bench, called the crime one of the most heinous acts of calculated murder I have encountered in my career. She sentenced both men to life in prison without possibility of parole, 18 consecutive life sentences to reflect the 18 lives they'd taken. Victims' families were allowed to give impact statements, and I listened to their pain and rage and grief, thinking about how easily David and Lily and I could have been among the victims, how my daughter's inexplicable tantrum had saved our lives through pure chance. Russell Vance attended the sentencing as well, sitting in the back of the courtroom, his expression hollow. After the hearing, I approached him and introduced myself, explained that I'd been supposed to be at the restaurant that night, but my daughter had refused to get in the car. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "My brother died because of negligence. These people died because of evil. I don't know which is worse." I didn't have an answer for that. In the aftermath of the trial, the insurance industry implemented new protocols for vetting claims related to food contamination, requiring independent investigations before any payouts. The restaurant industry developed new security standards for surveillance systems and access controls. The Oregon legislature passed laws making it a felony to tamper with food safety equipment or disable security cameras in commercial kitchens. And families like mine continued processing the randomness of survival, the impossible question of why some people live and others die based on nothing but timing and tantrums and chance. Lily never told us why she'd screamed that night, why she'd refused so violently to get in the car. We asked her about it weeks later, tried to understand if she'd sensed something or heard something or had some kind of premonition. She just said she'd wanted to stay home and play with her blocks. No explanation, no mystical intuition, just the ordinary stubbornness of a 5-year-old who didn't want to go to a fancy restaurant. David struggled with survivor's guilt for months, seeing a therapist weekly, processing the trauma of watching 18 people die while he sat unharmed at his table, waiting for wine that never arrived. Dr. Norton helped him understand that his survival wasn't something to feel guilty about, that he hadn't caused anyone's death by living through it. But I knew he still thought about it, still wondered about the randomness of who ordered the duck and who ordered something else, who lived and who died based on menu choices and seating assignments. I went back to work at the health department, where my experience with the investigation led to new protocols for responding to suspected food contamination events. Dr. Holloway promoted me to senior investigator, said my analysis of the security camera timing had been the breakthrough that unraveled the conspiracy. I accepted the promotion, but requested that my first project be developing better safety standards for commercial kitchens, finding ways to make it harder for people like Duchamp and Kemper to use food as a weapon. A year after the poisoning, the city of Portland held a memorial service for the 18 victims. David and I attended with Lily, who was now 6, and still didn't fully understand why we were there or what we were memorializing. The mayor read the names of the deceased, one by one, while families placed white roses on a memorial stone installed in a park near the restaurant. The Riverside Grill building had been sold and converted into something else. The memory of what happened there too toxic for anyone to consider running another restaurant in that space. Raymond Duchamp's reputation had been destroyed so completely that his name became shorthand for betrayal and greed. Lawrence Kemper's insurance license was revoked, his company dissolved, his family bankrupted by legal fees and civil judgments. Both men were serving their sentences in separate federal prisons, isolated from each other and from general population, because other inmates didn't take kindly to mass murderers. They would die in prison, decades from now, having spent the remainder of their lives paying for 18 murders committed for money they never got to spend. I think about that night sometimes, about the moment Lily started screaming in our driveway, about how close we came to being statistics in a mass casualty investigation. I think about the randomness of it, about how survival sometimes comes down to nothing but a child's tantrum and a canceled reservation and timing that's impossible to explain. I think about the 18 people who did order the duck, who did eat the sauce, who died while we were home playing with blocks. And I think about how fragile the systems are that we trust every day, how easy it is for evil to disguise itself as respectability, how a chef in a white coat and a broker in a suit can plot mass murder while maintaining professional smiles and friendly greetings. Lily is 7 now, thriving in 2nd grade, still occasionally stubborn about getting in cars, but generally more agreeable than she was that night. We've never told her the full story of what happened, what her refusal saved us from, because she's too young to carry that weight. Someday, when she's older, we'll explain it. We'll tell her about the 18 people who died, about the investigation and the trial and the justice that came too late for the victims, but at least came. We'll tell her that sometimes there's no explanation for the instincts that save us, no way to rationalize the random chances that determine who lives and who dies. David still has nightmares about the restaurant, about watching people collapse, about the moment he realized he was supposed to have been eating the same meal that killed 18 strangers. Dr. Norton says the trauma may never fully resolve, that surviving mass violence leaves scars even on people who weren't physically harmed. But he's managing it, processing it, learning to live with the knowledge that he witnessed something most people never see and survived something most people never face. And me? I'm more cautious now. I research restaurants before booking reservations. I notice security cameras and kitchen layouts and who has access to food preparation areas. I think like an investigator even when I'm just trying to have dinner with my family, always aware of the 1,000 ways things could go wrong, always calculating the odds of contamination and tampering and malice disguised as hospitality. It's not a healthy way to live, probably. Doctor. Norton would say I'm displaying hypervigilance, that I'm letting one traumatic near-miss color all my experiences. But I'm a food safety toxicologist. Hypervigilance is basically my job description, and after everything that happened, after seeing how easily 18 people could be murdered by someone they trusted to feed them, I don't think caution is a character flaw. I think it's survival. The memorial stone in the park lists 18 names, 18 lives, 18 families destroyed by greed and callousness, and the kind of evil that wears a professional smile. Every time I pass it, I think about how easily our names could have been on that stone, how my daughter's screaming saved us from becoming part of a mass murder investigation, from being victims instead of survivors. And I think about the question that haunts every survivor of random violence. Why did we live when others died? There's no answer. Just chance. Just timing. Just a 5-year-old who refused to get in the car for reasons she couldn't explain and probably never will. That's the thing about survival sometimes. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow patterns or reward virtue or punish negligence. It just happens, random and inexplicable, and you either accept the gift of it or you spend the rest of your life trying to justify why you deserve to be alive when others aren't. I choose to accept it. I choose to honor the 18 people who died by living fully, by loving my family, by working to make the system safer, so maybe the next Raymond Duchamp or Lawrence Kemper gets caught before they turn food into a weapon. I choose to trust my daughter's instincts, even when they manifest as screaming tantrums in driveways, because those instincts saved our lives in ways I'll never fully understand. And I choose to remember that evil often looks exactly like respectability, that the most dangerous predators are the ones who know how to smile and shake hands and welcome you into their spaces with professional warmth while planning your destruction. Raymond Duchamp lost everything he built over 23 years. Lawrence Kemper destroyed his career and his family for money he never collected. Both men will die in prison, their names synonymous with betrayal and mass murder. And 18 families will live forever with the absence of people they loved, people who died because they trusted a restaurant owner and ordered the special and had the misfortune of being hungry on the wrong night. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.